Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, I'm Penelope from the Kope People's Line Initiative. I'm here with our Field Staff Supervisor, Nelson. So we work in the Greater Serengeti ecosystem. Okay, so I think, as we all know, Tanzania is an important site for the long-term survival of lions. It hosts 3 of the 5 large remaining lion populations, and one of these is the Greater Serengeti ecosystem. The Greater Serengeti lion population comprises 2 subpopulations. So one is in the Serengeti, and the other is in the Ngorongoro crater, and in between lies the landscape of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. So from now on, I'm going to refer to the Ngorongoro Conservation Area as the NCA. So it's a multi-use protected area and UNESCO World Heritage listed site. And it's shared by pastoralists, their livestock and wildlife. And it was established to conserve natural resources, protect the interests of local people and promote tourism. This is a lucrative site for the tourism industry. In 2017, there were 600,000 visitors alone. It's home to diverse wildlife and about 100,000 pastoralists and their livestock. Now, Kope Line works across about 200 square kilometres of this landscape, 2,000 square kilometres in the crater, and also the landscape in between the Serengeti and the crater. Okay, so our challenges in this landscape. So a growing human population, poverty, conflict over resource access, and a poor relationship between the communities and the authority have resulted in conflict in this landscape. And despite the mandate of the NCA being one of coexistence, conflict between people and lions in particular is very high. So in the NCA, traditional hunting and retaliatory killing are both a problem. As our last speaker just mentioned, there has been a change in age sets in the Maasai communities last year in the NCA. And the retirement of the old warriors and the rise of the new, there's a renewed energy leading for traditional hunting by the young warriors wanting to prove themselves to their communities. So also what we've recently seen is a rise in parts being taken from lions that have been killed in hunts. This is like claws, teeth, that kind of thing. And we're still unsure at this stage whether there's a rise in trade of lion parts that's driving the lion killing, or if this is just an opportunistic behaviour taking place following a lion hunt. We also estimate that lion depredations cost the community $70,000 to $75,000 USD yearly. And it's the retaliatory and preemptive killing of lions from these depredation events that drives a lot of the decline in lion population throughout the historic range in the NCA. Okay, so just quickly, you can see on this graph, this is depredation data from 2013, but you can see we've got cattle, small stock and donkeys here. Brown is spotted hyena, yellow is leopard and red is lion. So you can see that leopard and hyena are responsible for the majority of the attacks, 61% combined, and lion are responsible for only 18%. So what makes them so vulnerable to retaliation? Well, to start off with, they take the most valuable livestock. They take the cattle. They also, in the NCA, they tend to attack in the late afternoon, evening, out in the pasture, rather than night attacks on bombers like the leopards and the hyenas do. And they do stay with their kill and try to defend it, which makes them easy to find, unlike the more elusive leopards and hyenas. Okay. Now, in the NCA, we monitor the 2 major subpopulations of lions, the Ngorongoro crater lions and the Ndutu-Masek lions. The Ndutu-Masek lions are located over here on the border of the Serengeti, and they are a source population for the Ngorongoro crater lions. The conflict in the landscape between the two means that lions looking to pass through, settle, visit, have a very poor chance of survival, and those that do inhabit that landscape tend to be nomadic, elusive individuals. So you can see these are bomas in the landscape of the NCA. Over here is the border of the Serengeti, down here is the crater. Yellow points are the lion depredations, and red points are depredations from other carnivores. So you can see the conflict exists extensively in that landscape between these two subpopulations. And this conflict has isolated the crater population from its source population, which has resulted in a long history of inbreeding, which is threatening its long-term survival. Okay, so this is the crater lion population. The light blue line, here is the total population. Dark blue is the adult population, which is the one you should look at. And up here you can see the entry of new males into the crater, born outside the crater, into the crater population over time. And there's not many of them. So in 1962, there was a population crash due to the Stomoxys biting fly, but the entry of 7 new males into the population in the late 1960s saw the population recover. And by the early 1980s, there was over 100 lions on the crater floor. But in 1994, there was another disease outbreak, canine distemper and babesia, caused another population crash, which affected the whole of the greater Serengeti lion population. Now, the Serengeti subpopulation recovered well following this. A third of the population was lost, but they recovered well. However, the crater population did not. They continued to have these little ups and downs in their population, and we believe that this was the result of poor disease resistance following an inbred population. But here, in I think it was about 2010, we had 4 males and later another solitary male make their way into the crater and take over the Munge Pride, and there was a cub boom. So this is just highlighting the threat to the crater population from its genetic isolation. So Kope lion is we're aiming to see the NCA continue as an important part of the greater Serengeti ecosystem. And in a world of diminishing space, we're trying to find a means by which humans and lions can coexist. We use a participatory community-based conservation model to try to establish a corridor of tolerance across the landscape to reconnect these two subpopulations. So in 2014, we engaged with the Lion Guardians in Kenya to implement their model in the landscape. Our Lion Guardians are called Ilchukuti, which is our guardian in Ma. And we employ, at the moment, 14 Ilchukuti across the landscape from the Serengeti to the Ngorongoro crater rim. And we're looking to employ 2 to 3 more this year. They monitor zones of approximately 100 square kilometres, slightly smaller in rugged terrain, and in alignment with the Lion Guardians model, their primary purpose is to stop the lion killing or lion hunts, mitigate conflict, assist in the monitoring of lions in the landscape, and also educate their communities. Now, the specific conflict mitigation activities they undertake, as Benji's already gone through, is they monitor zones for lion presence to warn herders of any nearby danger. They find lost livestock and reinforce traditional bomas, again, to reduce depredations. They also treat livestock wounds to improve the survival rates of livestock, and they assist their communities as needed. Now, some of our successes in 2017 were that we stopped 6 hunts in comparison to the 26 in 2016. We're confident that this reflects a reduction in the overall rate of hunting. And we recovered over 6,000 head of livestock, which represents more than 480,000 USD. They reinforced 66 bomas, provided 370 treatments to wounded livestock, and they participated in the searches for 9 lost people. Many of these are children who, can potentially be killed by wild animals out there. So these are really important. Okay, In addition to our conflict mitigation work, we do continue the long-term monitoring of the two subpopulations in the NCA, which was started by the Serengeti Lion Project, and we continue on that 50 years of data collection. In addition to this subpopulation monitoring, we use opportunistic sightings, call-ups, collections of genetic samples to try and understand the lion presence in the multi-use landscape. And whilst we initially deployed GPS collars as a way of understanding fine-scale movements and behaviour patterns in that multi-use landscape, they've become a really important conflict mitigation tool for our project. By knowing the daily presence of lions who inhabit high conflict areas, such as Ndutu on the Serengeti border during the dry season, we can better guide the protective work of our Ilchakuti in the landscape. So we define our success by an improved tolerance by the communities towards living with lions, an increased survival rate of lions in the multi-use landscape, and ultimately genetic exchange observed in the crater population. Now I'm just going to highlight some of these ongoing challenges that we see as sort of background drivers to the conflict, which are a bit bigger scale and require, I think, collaborations and partnerships to address. So the first one is the lack of tangible benefits for the communities. So whilst the work of the Ilchakuti can certainly mitigate the conflict, it cannot entirely overcome the livestock losses due to carnivores, so that the communities continue to bear the financial cost of living with lions in the landscape. Now, Tanzania has a compensation-like scheme called reconciliations, I think, and they have generally been considered a failure. The NCA trialled it, the NCA authority trialled it in 2011 and have since put it under review. Now, the NCA authority does provide financial benefits to the communities living in the NCA. They provide approximately 2.7 billion Tanzanian shillings cash. They provide schools, and they also provide offsets to the cost of food. However, a lot of the community members do not view these benefits as being in any way linked to conservation. Also, the cash benefits are provided to the Pastoralist Council, and the Pastoralist Council was a body established to connect the NCA authority and the communities. But the Pastoralist Council takes a third of that 2.7 billion Tanzanian shillings in per diems. So a lot of that money doesn't actually reach the communities. So last year we engaged with a master's student from the US to conduct a feasibility study on a compensation incentive payment scheme. So under a CIP, the communities derive benefits from living with lions. Now, by placing conditions around the receiving the benefits, such as no lion kills or lion presence, you're aligning the economic sort of interests of the community with the conservation goals. So this process is really, it really hinges on it being participatory. So we engaged with the NCA authority, the Pastoralist Council, the residents, and also the tourism industry in the NCA to gain some insight into whether people would be interested in the program and also its potential design and operation. It was generally really well received, but there are some ongoing challenges around how it would be funded long term and how it would be, how the benefits would be distributed, whether they would be distributed at a community level or an individual level, and also how the conservation objectives would be measured. The next big one is the population growth in the NCA. So when the NCA was established in 1959, there was an estimated 10,000 people living within its borders. Now, currently, there's an estimated 100,000 people living within its borders. That's a tenfold increase over 59 years. And whilst the population has increased, the livestock units per capita have decreased, making this a poorer population. It's estimated that 57% of households are poor to destitute. Furthermore, only 3% of the population owns 80% of the livestock, making this a huge disparity in wealth. So moving forward, the population growth of the NCA really does need to be addressed, but as always, this is a complicated issue with ties to culture, health, access to services, and I think beyond the capacity of a land conservation project to address alone. The next big issue is grazing pressure. So the NCA does face high grazing pressure, and the rangelands have lost productivity with a move towards invasive unpalatable species. There's a view or a perception that the livestock in the NCA have increased because they are concentrating in areas where the grazing remains. However, the cattle numbers have remained relatively constant over the years, but the small stock numbers have increased. In fact, they've tripled. So, and they have quite a large impact on the vegetation because they do tend to eat the roots. So an adaptive rangeland management is needed, particularly combining the knowledge of the local Maasai population with modern practices to address this issue of overgrazing. And finally, poor relationships. This is a really big one in the NCA. So the relationship between the NCA authority and the communities has been tainted by suspicion, lack of dialogue, and a failure to engage the communities as conservation partners in the landscape. The removals of people from the Serengeti into the NCA remains in the bitter living memory of many. And despite the mandate of the NCA being one where the communities and the authorities should be engaging together as conservation partners, this sort of bitterness in the relationship really guides the decision making on both sides. So it's possible that an external mediator specialised in conflict transformation may be needed to guide this relationship into a more positive space. Finally, in conclusion, the NCA is a politically difficult landscape to work in. Up until recently, Kope has been one of only 2 wildlife research projects that have been successfully working in the landscape. Recent changes in the management have made them more open to collaborations, which has been fantastic. And Kope really feels that to address these broader issues in the landscape, the people, the wildlife, moving forward, that partnerships and collaborations are needed to address these unique challenges of the NCA. Okay. Thank you. Everyone's a little startled.